So we have today and next week, and next week's probably going to be a short class. Hopefully you guys by tonight will have handed in your first draft, and I will be going over for both of my classes over the next few days and getting you video feedback. One thing I wanted to say before we start class, though, is that give me 1 second. Oh, wrong. Let me log in. No wonder it's messing up. If there are late assignments that you've been handing in that I have not given you any feedback on. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff in here. Okay, great. So there's been some people that have put stuff in here. So I have stuff to look at now, which is great. For a couple of weeks. All right, great. If I haven't, I will go over this stuff here. But if I haven't gotten back to you, whoops, wrong spot. I'm going to pop it into the chat here. That's where it is. And then I'll pop it onto the top of our class stream so that you can just click on that and pop late and revised assignments in there. And I can get to them. So most people are here now. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to teach next week some new techniques, but today I thought would be good because you're going to be spending hopefully most of the next bit of time working on your final, just going over and reviewing what we learned this semester. I mean, we were exposed to a vast amount of material, techniques, concepts, and probably more than I normally teach, but I would say that this class is pretty good on Zoom, and my film scoring class is good on Zoom. My other two classes that I teach over the course of the academic year are more challenging, let's put it that way, to teach on Zoom. But I was able to do, I think, because many people that are in this class are either graduate students or took recording studio fundamentals, I was able to teach a few things that I don't normally get into in this class because some of you had some of the stuff that I normally teach in Audio MIDI 1. Many of you have had it before. So I felt confident in introducing some new some different things. So that's exactly what we're going to do today is just go right ahead with a review. So I'm just going to start right at the top and just work through a bunch of stuff, all right? So the first thing that's very, 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 very important is organization, right? So you'll see here that I've got folders with all sorts of projects in them. But if I take a look here at, say, this, right? This is what I did in 2017 for the Kennedy Center Honors. And you notice I've got a folder in my project drive, and each of the films I worked on has its own folder. And if each one of these folders here are called session folders. And in the session folder, you will find session files, which are all of these. And you notice I diaried my work as I was writing and doing revisions right here. And then I've got all of these subfolders inside of this project. And each of these subfolders contains data that Pro Tools needs right, to run the session. So if I were to open this session on a different computer without having these folders available in this structure, then Pro Tools would give you a lot of error messages that you would not be able to resolve, and you wouldn't be able to really run the session properly. So that's why it's really important to understand, and most of you at this point do, although I am still getting the occasional session file being sent to me, which is a little baffling to me. So session folder, right? Session file right here. All right, so this is the actual Pro Tools file. So in other words, the difference between the two is that the session file is what's in, that's your actual Pro Tools session. The folder, the session folder, is a container. It's a file cabinet that contains all the data, the documents, whatever, in subfolders that Pro Tools needs to run the session properly. Now, I'm not sure what the session, like if you were to use another DAW, I'm not sure how they handle that file management for each project. Like I'm not sure how Logic does it, or Performer, or Cubase, because I haven't really worked. I can get my way around some of them, but I haven't really worked in detail on them, and I haven't studied them enough to really know what the file and folder structure is. So if you're going to go and learn a new DAW using some of the principles that we've gone over this semester, what I would say one of the first things you need to do is to understand the structure of how your projects are archived, how they're set up, how they're stored, how they're managed. You know, are there subfolders? Is there one big folder? You know, where are things located on your computer? So that's the first thing, right? Session folder and session file. And so let me open up this first one again, right? So the audio files contains any audio that I've recorded inside of the Pro Tools session or that I've imported into Pro Tools. So if I was to open this, you'll see right here, right? These WAV files here. These I imported from the film I was scoring. And then these are other little bits within the large, like I guess, I remember now, this was Carmen de Lavalade. Right, so this was about a 5-minute film, and I wrote 3 or 4 bits that were interspersed with actual scenes of her being in a movie with Harry Belafonte, or her dancing on stage with some ballet somewhere. So, and then here's a melody, some melodies that I recorded audio, a mix. Bounced files are the things that I rendered to send, you know, as file mixes or demos to my clients, right? And I typically, there's a video files folder that I typically put all my video files in that I'm working on. So that's all the structure of that, and that's how that works. Okay, so if you're going to open up Pro Tools moving forward, and let me know if there's any questions on any of this as we're going forward. All right. Command N. So when you open up a Pro Tools, a new session, you can open that up using the key command, command and the letter N, right? If Pro Tools is not open, that dashboard will be the first thing you see. But if you've closed out of a session but not quit Pro Tools and you want to open a new session, it's command N, as you all know, and you get your dashboard here. Now, this is how you name your project. This is where you're going to store it, local. Here is your file type. For our class, we've been working with WAV files, 24-bit, 44.1, and then this is something I haven't gone over, but you can actually save your own I/O settings, so that like some of you had like I guess you must have opened up a session that I sent you, and it imported my own personal I/O settings into your computer, so you can actually save, which I can go over at some point if you need to do that, or you can just Google that and you can find a tutorial about that. But you'll always have interleaved for your audio files, and then right here, prompt for location. Otherwise, it will default to this, and you'll have to find it in your documents folder, right? But I prompt for location. Now, what's also on here is recent, which shows you these are all recent projects I've opened up to look at, right, over the past like few weeks. And then this is for stuff that you've got stored in the cloud that you might be collaborating with somebody else with. And there's another thing called templates, and maybe that's something that I'll go over as part of learning for today. So, for example, the mini series will be finished with concurrently with the end of the semester, which is why right now is a little insane, is called the 96 effect, right? And I've got a couple of templates where I just click and it opens up with all my instruments loaded in, everything routed, color coded, groups, aux tracks with effects, everything. And that's a really good way to set up a template for a project, and then it becomes very easy to work from. But I'll show you that hopefully towards the end of the class. So we're going to create, and then you got your session is named, and then you'll navigate for a place now to work from. So the proper way to work is that I've got my computer's hard drive, and I've got a separate hard drive for all my projects, and then separate hard drives for all of my samples. So right, and then I've just got a few backup drives here that are just already inside my computer. So I typically would save a project to my project drive inside of a folder so in other words, if I'm working on an album, I'll have the master folder for the album, and inside that folder will be all of my songs with individual session folders with all the data inside of each one of those session folders. Or if I'm working on a film, the master folder for the film will be in my project drive, and inside that master folder will be a bunch of subfolders for different cues, or maybe for each act. It just depends on how I'm working and rendering the work. But what I asked you guys to do, since you probably don't have that, is to go on your desktop and create, right, an AM1 master folder. So for what we've been doing in class, working on your desktop is fine, but I'm just telling you that that's not the optimal way to work. And then you say, excuse me, chopped out my audio for a second, which Pro Tools does. Okay, so this top line here is called your toolbar. Over here are your edit modes. This is your zooming controls. This is another zoomer tool, trimmer tool, selector tool, grabber tool, scrubber tool, which I haven't gone over this semester. And to be honest with you, I never use the scrubber tool, and the pencil tool. The tools I use on a day-to-day basis are trim tool, selector, grabber, and the pencil tool. Right here is the counter. All right, and this is the main counter, and it has all of these different time bases. And so for our class, we've been working in bars and beats. Now, one thing I haven't talked about is that you can click here and create a sub counter, which I typically do, which I leave as time code. But we will, that's maybe for audio MIDI 2. I talk about that. Okay, so I'll skip over this for right now. And then this area here, this is your grid. Now, if you click on that and it becomes dark, the background, you'll notice that on my click track here, there are no grid lines. When I click on this and it becomes active, it shows the grid lines. And this is your grid resolution right here. You can click on this and you can make it 1 bar. You can make it a half note, or you can make it minutes and seconds, right? And you could change how that, any of these things here. Oh, I never noticed that before. Clips and markers you can have in here. Interesting. I'll have to see what that is. I've never seen that before. All right, so we're going to go to bars and beats. And for the edit window, I usually keep things in quarter notes. I don't make it any, and maybe even larger than that, unless I'm working on audio. But if I'm working on MIDI, I don't make the grid any more detailed than a quarter note usually. So this is our transport, right? So this is rewind to the beginning. You know, this is rewind, fast forward, go to the end, stop, play, and record enable. I tend to teach you guys to not have this visible unless you're recording audio, in which case you would want some pre-roll and post-roll to punch in and out, which is something I do go over in audio MIDI too. But everything here that you can use this for, you can do with key commands, which is a much better way to work, and I've showed you those key commands. And these are your MIDI controls right over here. This is wait for note, which hasn't been functioning properly in multiple versions of Pro Tools, so I no longer use that. Right? There's your metronome, Midi Merge, and your conductor track on and off. Now, in Pro Tools, many things that are visible are customizable, and you should know how to change the way that something looks. Because, I should stay down here. Because you may not need to see things for certain parts of the session. So in other words, if you're just writing and all you have is a 13-inch laptop, well, you want to get as much space as you can to see the edit window. So up here in this upper right-hand corner here, there's a circle with a downward-facing triangle. And if you click on that, you'll see all these controls. And what I've told you is to turn off some of these. And then you'll see that your toolbar is much tidier. There's less stuff to look at. Oh, you don't need to have synchronization either. So that becomes less busy, because sometimes what happens is that some of these controls on your laptop don't fit on your 13-inch laptops. They go past the border of how wide you can make the Pro Tools edit window and still have it be visible. So, yeah. Now, these edit modes here, we've used 3 edit modes. We've used shuffle, slip, and grid. I'm going to show you today what spot does. So that's your toolbar, all right? Below the toolbar are your rulers. And your rulers are also customizable. With this, you click on that top triangle there, and then you have all these things that you can see. I typically, the way this is set up now is how I typically work. Sometimes I put in chords, sometimes I put in the key if I want to see it, but minutes and seconds, bars and beats, minutes and seconds, markers, tempo, and meter. Because that's what I most typically use. So that's what I've got set up there, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. Now, some of you may see something like this. This is called the universe, right? And what it gives you is an overview of the entire session. And for what we're doing, it's pretty useless. What I think is that if you're mixing a 3-hour film, it's really good to use the universe, because then you can look over the entire session and you could be working at minute 10 and you want to check it against something at hour, 1 hour and 30 minutes, you can just click right over here and it'll just jump to that spot, right? But for us that are working on like 3, 4, 5, 6 minute songs, I've never found the universe to be particularly helpful for that. But like I said, or maybe I haven't said, Pro Tools is set up for different people to get to use it, right? So you learn how to use the things that are relevant to your artistic goals. So I'm not mixing a 90-minute film. That's something I would probably, I think there's more of a chance that I'm 20 years old than I'll mix a 90-minute film. There's no chance that I'm 20 years old. So but you can just close that by hovering right at that bar, and the cursor changes to a cross, and then you can just lift it up. Now, there's some other things that we do in Pro Tools I want to talk about here. Now, the top here in Setup, Playback Engine. I haven't talked a lot about this, but we're going to talk about this now. I'm going to click on this. Now, for most of you, your Playback Engine will be something called built-in or Mac Pro speakers or MacBook Pro speakers or something like that. It's built in. If you've got an audio interface, you would click on the audio interface that you have. Just remember that if you click on the audio interface as your Playback Engine, you either need speakers or headphones plugged into your audio interface. You will not get audio out of the speakers on your computer. There's also something called Pro Tools Aggregate I/O. Don't ever have that selected. That's a very handy tool to have, but it's like a completely separate lesson. It's how you can aggregate multiple audio devices to create one big audio device for Pro Tools, but there's clocking issues and just a bunch of other things. I did teach it one semester. I think the first semester I was online, so I guess last spring, I taught it because some students had the only microphone they had in Recording Studio Fundamentals was they had like a little Zoom video camera or a Zoom handheld Zoom stereo recorder with built-in microphones, and they were using that to record themselves, and they were using this like they wanted to plug into their computers. So I taught them how to make an aggregate device so they could use the Zoom microphone and still get stuff out of their speakers on their computer, where they could just plug their headphones into the speakers, into the headphone output, and work that way. But you don't have to worry about that. Now, there's something here which I haven't talked about called the buffer size. So what the buffer size, let's go here, right? So there's something here called the buffer size, right? Now, what the buffer size does is it increases or decreases the amount of data that's put into a buffer. And the more data that's in a buffer, the less data has to be streamed by your computer's CPU and hard drive throughput, right? But so you can click on this and you can see that you can go up to 1,024 samples, right? And so that takes a lot of strain off of your CPU. I typically, actually, I don't know why this is set to 256, but if you guys can get your laptops at 256 samples, that's a good space where you can work and play things on the keyboard, and there isn't what's called latency. So in other words, when you've got a higher buffer size, you'll press the key on your MIDI keyboard, and then it'll sound, right? So I just exaggerated that that time there, but 256, that's a good sample rate to keep it at. I typically work at 128, but I've got a much more powerful computer, so it's fine. Okay. And then dynamic plugin processing, if you guys have this in your Pro Tools, I would turn that on. And the reason I would turn that on is because what it does is it takes any plugins that you've got, like EQs, compressors, or reverbs. If nothing is going through them, it actually doesn't turn them off, but the computer, they're not affecting the computer load. So in other words, it's a way of getting more out of your computer. So those plugins are only being used when there's something, when they're only being used they're only counting on your CPU usage when they're actually being used. So if you've got a section where there's like a drum track with audio, and it's got a compressor and an EQ on it, and then there's 8 bars where those drums aren't playing, well then the compressor and the EQ are not being used. Well, Pro Tools sort of turns them off, and they don't count in your, to like add a burden to your CPU. So that's pretty good. All right. Now, I/O. This is your input and output page. Now, we haven't gone over this a lot because I just, at the beginning of the semester, there's so much setting up to do that I just sort of want to teach people what they need to get started instead of getting people bogged down in minutia. But as the semester goes on, there's been some issues for people because I think that some people have opened up a session that I may have sent them where I've routed things a certain way with names, and it comes up on their computer that way. So the ones that you have to worry about are your input, your output, and your bus. And basically what I'll do at the beginning of a session is just set everything to default by clicking that, all 3 of these, right? And then if these had been named, like let's say I do this. Right, so I've got those 3 tracks named dog, cat, and mouse. And if I hit default, boom, they change back to the original bus names and the input and output names. And then click OK down here. More setup. So there's, the session setup, which I don't talk about. I'll talk about that next semester probably if you take Audio MIDI 2. MIDI Studio, I don't talk about this too much, but MIDI Studio, if you click on this, right, this opens up something that's in your, if you go to your Mac hard drive, you go to your applications, however you get there, and you scroll all the way down to the bottom to something called Utilities, right? There is something called Audio MIDI Setup. What I do, I've got that on my dock so I can access it really easy. And this shows you what's actually hooked up to your computer in terms of audio devices. So I've got my my big monitor, computer monitor, has audio, I guess. My Roland video switcher, which is this thing here, has audio, and it has has 2 different ways of looking at audio. My Mac Pro speakers, my Focusrite Thunderbolt, which is the Claret that I'm using for class, and my Focusrite HD, which is my main audio interface, and then this aggregate bit, right? So that's your audio, all your audio devices, but you can close that window and go up to Window here and show your MIDI Studio, and it shows all the different devices that you've got hooked up for MIDI, right? So the ones that are grayed out, this and this, they were things that I have had hooked up recently. They're grayed out because they're not hooked up now. So the Uno USB MIDI interface, that comes from my digital piano into my computer. The VR1 HD MIDI, that's the switcher here. The Nano Control 2, that's my MIDI sliders, right? And then my audio interface, the Claret, has MIDI also. So that's my MIDI Studio. Now, if you go to Input Devices right here, this is what Pro Tools is seeing that's available to input MIDI, right? So I've got my Claret 4 pre, it's got MIDI on the back, DIN, 5-pin DIN MIDI connection, so I can hook up a keyboard to it. my nano control, I could turn that off and then it won't read anything, right? This is my digital piano, and then this is my Roland video streaming mixer. Another thing you can do is input filter. You could tell Pro Tools what to record as far as MIDI goes. Right, so I turned off mono aftertouch, poly aftertouch, and system exclusive. I just turned that off. And then you could turn off some controllers, and you could, add and remove a controller. And what that is useful for example, is that when we're in regular teaching times and we're in the labs, some of the M Audio keyboards that we have there, they're not very robust, and the mod and pitch wheels get funky, and students may brush against the mod wheel and turn it up by accident, and then they record all that data, and then they don't know how to get rid of it if they're just starting, or the pitch bend wheel starts recording data, starts transmitting data even if you're not touching it. They're funky keyboards. They're not really built for having students on them 12 hours a day. So what we can do is we could turn those off here, right? And then they won't get recorded into people's projects. So this is the input filter. I haven't shown that to anybody before. All right, and then there's one other preference.
Switch your
Oh,
screen.
yes, thank you. Let me go back to that. Okay, so this is the MIDI input filter, right? So the way I've got this set up for my system is there's something wrong with my main MIDI keyboard, which once the semester ends and these projects ends, I'm going to have to send it in to get looked at, and it's transmitting system exclusive sysx messages, which doesn't do anything but just adds more data. So I accept that, and then you can choose, you can add a controller, right? So if I wanted to do here, Ken, we were talking about the soft pedal. Here it is, 67. So I could record everything. I could now add the soft pedal if I didn't want to record that controller in there. Okay. Let's go to preferences. Now, let's go ahead a little bit. MIDI, right? Automatically create click track in new sessions. Make sure that that's checked. This way, every time you open a session, it'll create a click track. Now, sometimes you'll open a session from somebody else that does not have this checked, and unfortunately, it overrides. This is one bug I have with Pro Tools, is it will override your own personal preferences, and then you have to reset some of them up. So that's one reason why I typically have people, I typically do all my homework on my laptop, and I leave my work computer alone from school projects. Okay, so that's one.
Pete, I have a question.
Yes.
Some programs have a way to save your settings, save your preferences. Does Pro Tools have this?
I'm not quite sure about that. Save them as like a file that you can open up, right? It has a way to do that with. It has a way to do. Yeah, it has a way to do that with your input and output, your I/O settings. You can definitely do that, but I've never seen that with these preferences, and I think that really is a drag. Right? It doesn't give you the option here to save it as.
Okay.
But for me, it's not a big deal. I only have a few things that I need to always check, is the click track, and then go to display, right? Now, this is one thing I like, is to have your tooltips turned on, function and details. And the tooltips are what happens when if I hover over something for a second, then a little doodad pops up to tell you what it is. Like right now, you could see I'm hovering over this, and it says link timeline and edit selection. Link track and edit selection, right? Automation follows edit. So that's a good thing to turn on, those tooltips. Even though I know most of these things, I keep it on because you know, I have Alzheimer's disease. I forget things like very quickly. So
Pete, I have a question.
yeah,
When you put these new preferences in and you open up an older project, what happens to the preferences? They're what the older project was, or
yeah, what the older project was. Correct. And then you have to reset them up. And like I was just saying, to the is that's definitely something that's not a good thing.
Hey, Pete, there is a third-party application called Pro Tools Preps that enables you to save those and also trash your preferences if your preferences ever get corrupted.
Yeah, it's a free. I didn't realize you could save them there, Ken, but it's a free. This is something that everybody should have. Is where is mine?
Called PT Pref, I think.
Let's see. Yeah, there's something. Do I have it in my dock? Maybe I haven't installed it on this computer yet. Yeah, there's something called a preference trash or something like that. It's a free. It's really a great a piece of software. Let me see if I can find.
I'll look up the link and post it.
Yeah, can you do that, Ken, while I'm teaching here? It's a free piece of software that you can that you should have actually, because you'll trash your preferences, which you should do every once in a while. It trashes like all your not preferences in Pro Tools, but inside the library part of your computer. I'm not sure how that works with Windows though, Paul. All right, so moving forward with this. The way I like to work is I like to set up my plugin menus by category and manufacturer and leave this alone. Now, on the newest version of Pro Tools, you have Classic or Dark, right? They're trying to be slick with this Dark so that it looks like this other program called Studio One or other pieces of software, but I don't like Dark. It's hard for me to see. I stay with Classic, but if you select Dark, you'll have to restart Pro Tools in order to get it to work. But the most important things right here are in the color coding thing. Always display marker colors. MIDI note color shows velocity. Default track color coding is tracks and MIDI channels, and the default clip color coding is a track color. So in other words, your tracks and your MIDI channels have a color, and any clips, whether they're audio or MIDI, are the same color as the track. Now, these other ones have uses. So in other words, if you make it that you set your clip color coding to be marker locations, what you can do is you can set up a selection where if you're working on a pop tune, you've got the introduction, verse, and so the introduction is one color. All the tracks are one color. The verse, all the tracks are one color. Second verse, all the tracks are another color. Chorus, the tracks are a different color, right? And what's really cool about that is that if you're editing or just, you could just see where the different sections of the song are. That is a way to work that's valid in pop music styles, I think. But I never do that personally myself. And then one other thing that you should know too is that Pro Tools has auto backup, right? Which is probably turned on in yours. I never have it on because some of my sessions, if I've got 80 or 90 or 100 tracks and it's Contact filled with instruments, Contact it'll resave all the samples. So I could be in the middle of doing something and all of a sudden Pro Tools, it's taken it like 30 seconds to save 20 gigabytes worth, or 30 gigabytes or 40 gigabytes worth of data. And then, it makes Pro Tools crash. So I don't use that at all. But for you guys, that might be a good thing to turn on. And then, so if I just, for right now, as I'm working, because I'm not going to be using Contact, I could turn that on and I could back up every 2 minutes, right? And then I'll show you in a couple of minutes what happens. And so that's that. Now, one thing I haven't shown you yet, or maybe I have, is if you take a look at your click track, you can, if you don't like that default sound that comes with Pro Tools, and I don't see why you would love it because it's horrible, you could change that. And the way you change that is you go right over to here and you can click and you get all these different sounds that you could choose from. So I particularly like either the MPC click or the Uri click. And then you just have to do it on both of these lines, click 1 and click 2. And well, let me just do it with the MPC click. And then what you can do is you can save this. So if you click right here where it says preset, save settings as, and then it will navigate to the click to folder. And then you could call this MPC1. And then you'll have MPC. Now I've got 2 Uri clicks set up, so now I've got an MPC and I could choose between the two, and that's a much more pleasant sound. Okay. Any questions on that? Let me see. Anybody writing anything in the chat? Yes. Thank you, Ken. That's something that everybody should download that has a Mac, and it really is very helpful.
Hey Pete, if you make that click like your personal click, can you save that as default, and will it come up every time?
It's supposed to. It's a little funky, right? So in other words, you can save that as user default, right? And then if you go back in again, settings preferences, set plugin default to user setting, then it should, every time you pop in and open a new session with a click track, it should do that. But I find it 50-50, and I don't know why. You know? Yeah, it's a little, this definitely some things about all these, every bit of software has funky things about it, you know? It's just what you get used to. All right, so over here on the upper right-hand corner of our edit window or edit page, there is a box with gray letters A and Z, right, in this area here. That should be turned on. And that's called key focus, edit key focus, keyboard focus. There's whatever you want to call it. What that does is that enables you to use your keyboard here. So if I wanted to zoom in, right, I'm hitting the T key. To zoom out, I'm hitting the R key. You can use F for fade. There's a bunch of one key commands that you can do, which just speeds up your workflow. I find this, and what's really cool about this is that if you open up your MIDI editor, when I put in a MIDI instrument track, and you're working in the MIDI editor, it will automatically switch the key focus to whatever window is active. And I'll show you how you could tell whichever window is active in a couple of minutes. All right, so we are ready to rock, and we want to set our default tempo. Well, I don't know what the number is, but right here I'm gonna hit return and get back to the top. Right here, I'm set to 120. Well, I want something that's like about like there, right? Not too, like moderately slow. So if I click on that, this little tempo change window opens up. And see, the BPM is highlighted. And so if I start tapping on the T key, to get the tempo in my head, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and that gives you a ballpark tempo. So I'd say it's probably 70 or 72, 70. Once I get in the ballpark, I'll just pick a number close to that. That's a more normal tempo. I don't think I've ever played anything that's in 69 beats a minute. But, okay. So I set my tempo up. Great. Now I'm going to, I want to add an instrument to play, a MIDI instrument, right? So I'm going to do the keyboard command, Command Shift N like Nancy. Everybody knows that. And you can select a stereo instrument track, right? That's great. But what I haven't taught you is that there are presets, and you can create your own track presets, which I'm going to teach you how to do as part of this review. So select stereo, I believe is the right thing to do. Then if you go to instrument track, down at the bottom here, let me zoom in on this. Track presets, Avid, Air Instrument Bundle, Mini Grand. And then if you click here, right, these are some of the presets. So let's say I wanted to do soft piano. I can click on that, and then I can create. And then notice, it actually names the track for you and everything. So let me go over that again. And the way I got to that window is I right-clicked on the name, and then I went down to here, which is delete. Command Shift N, and I think that you can just go to track presets, Avid, Air Instruments Bundle, Mini Grand. Yeah, I don't think you need to click stereo. And then you could do multiples. So let's say I want to do Mini Grand, and let's try underwater piano, whatever that is. And then go to track presets, Avid, boom. And then notice it's got some like presets for you. So let's do Chic so we can get some Nile Rodgers in there. And then if I click on the plus, I can go to track presets, Avid, Air Instruments, expand to, and let's say I wanted to put a bass. Let's say it's synth bass. Click on this, and then here's some of your click basses. And let's pick, I'm just going to pick something. MKS Unibass. That's MKS is a Roland keyboard from the 1980s. And if I open this, click on this. Oh, I see. That's interesting, right? So it overrode my tempo. That's interesting because of what's going on with the drums. So I just, I've just set up a whole thing here, right? So that's using track presets. Now, let me show you how to create a track preset. So Command Shift N, mono stereo, instrument track. All right. So I'm going to put in all right, so this is a Juno 6 soft synth, right? And let's say I just call up a preset and play it. So these are synth strings, right? And I want to make them a little bit darker. And I could dark. Dark Juno strings. If I wanted to make this as a track preset, I could just right-click here on the name, and you see it says Save Track Preset. And then category. You want to add a category, and you're going to add Pete presets. Yep. Okay, and then hit OK. Dark Juno strings. It has tags, right? Boom. Now I'm going to delete this. Command Shift N. track presets, Avid. Notice there's a new folder here called Pete Presets. Dark Juno strings, the only one I have, create. And boom. So remember when I had you guys make some presets on Expand 2? Well, you could save them in the preset menu there, but if you wanted to have, there was a piano that you really liked that you'd like to use to write often, right? You can create a track preset and just open that up much quicker. And it comes with the track named and everything like that. So that's kind of a handy little tip. All right, let me delete all this for now. Now, this is our track header, I guess you could call it. So this is, this is where all the track data is living over here, but this is what's actually happening. And you can customize what you see here by clicking on this little triangle up at the top left-hand corner of the edit window. It's called the Edit Window View Selector. Click on that. And I don't need to see comments. I do want to see my instrument, right? Now, for you guys with laptops, when you're first working, you don't need to see sends or I/O, right? You don't need, the less you need to see, the better. You'd have more screen real estate for editing. But I typically like to show this much stuff. But I have a 34-inch screen, so it's, I have room to play. Okay. So that's that. Now, color coding. If I click on this little bar here on the left-hand side, this sort of like marine green or whatever color that is, bluish green, it opens up the palette, which is over here, right? And you can change the color of that header. Now, this little rainbow here, if you click on that, you notice now that whole track right there has changed color. And you can make that very gauche, right? And you could change the brightness, saturation. I like a nice pastelish color myself. I don't like things to be really garishly dark and contrasty and with lots of saturation. I prefer a more subtle look, and that's something you can adjust. And I've said this before, but if you're using MIDI, I would avoid these yellows and these lime greens and maybe even some of the second line of green, because what happens is that when you're editing MIDI information, like the velocity stalks, the velocity stalks become very difficult to see, and I'll show you that in a second. All right.
Professor,
Yes.
if you do the rainbow color on one track, does that save for all
Yes.
the other ones? Okay.
Yeah, so watch what happens. See, it's all gray here on the click track, even though this one is the underwater is selected. But when I do this, it's all, see how it then changes color? This would be a little bit more apparent if I turn that to something red, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I turn that off, you see that everything goes gray,
Got
except
it.
for this little part here.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. All right. So we're now ready to record something, right? So I'm at 127. I'm going to go back to my 72. Underwater piano. Yeah. Okay, so what I typically have students do is make sure that the metronome is on. Now, let's do one thing about the metronome. So these are your click and count off options. it defaults to the click playing during both play and record. That's really obnoxious. What I like to do is to set it to only during record. This way it's only, you only hear the click track when you're recording and not when you're playing stuff back. Don't worry about all these other things here. This is if you want to create a click track from a MIDI instrument. So in other words, if I wanted to create a click track from Boom, I could do that, and I could select the MIDI note, the instrument, but it comes with a built-in click track. Just use that. Now, typically, I've just been teaching people to do a count off of 2 bars. I don't typically work that way, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. But this is a decent way to work. Then, to get this recording, now remember at the beginning of the semester, we played around with our Apple preferences, system preferences, and we went to Spotlight. Keyboard shortcuts, right? We turned these off. I also use these as standard, the F1 and F2 as standard function keys. You guys don't have to do that. That's fine. This just makes it faster for me to navigate. That becomes a problem for you guys because you're using your volume control on your up over here to turn the volume up and down on your laptops. But you can hold down the FN key and do that. Now, and then the other thing I had you guys set up on your mouse was to make sure that your secondary click was on. This way when you can right click on the mouse with the mouse and left click. And that gives you some stuff, some good options. Okay, so I'm going to record something and I have a 2-bar count off. Now, if you've got an extended keyboard like I do, you just push the number 3 on the numeric keypad. 2, 2, 2, 3, 4. I can't stand that sound. Let me change that sound. Okay. What was I going to say? Froze my brain. Okay, let me try another 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Right, and that's how you record. Now, let's say I made a mistake and I wanted to play over starting right here, right? You notice I came in a little bit early on the grid, so I'm going to be in slip mode and just put my playback head just before that. And I'm using the selector tool. I'm in count off. Now, if you don't have an extended keyboard, the keyboard shortcut to get things recording is Command Spacebar. 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. So you can easily, just piece together a piece of music. You don't have to start always from the beginning and get a complete performance. Now, let me go over that shortcut again. So it's Command space bar, right? Track has to be record enabled. Now I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to record something from the beginning again. And then we're going to talk about doing some editing. Oops, record enable. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Command space bar. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. All right. Now, let's say I wanted to edit that and change it a little bit, clean up some notes. I would highlight this, and then down here, this horizontal line with an upward facing arrow, click on that, and it opens up the Midi editor. Now, notice that I've got this highlighted, and you see here that same amount of time is highlighted. If I want to make this entire highlighted bit fit inside this edit window, the key command is Control, Option, and the letter F like Frank, right? Or A, fits everything in there. Now, to zoom in and zoom out, the R and the T key works here. Now let me show you a little trick here. Notice that because I'm in this edit window, this A and Z over here is amber. That's the keyboard focus is now active in this, because this window is active. And the way that you could tell this window is active, not only that this is amber, is that right here on the toolbar, it has a yellow, gold, or amber outline. I don't know if you can see that, right? You see that there? If I were to click here, you'll notice that this toolbar up here now has that golden or yellow or amber outline. And you'll notice that the keyboard focus is highlighted here, but not here. But if I click down in this area, that all shifts. Now, where did my MIDI information go? It's no longer there. I don't know what I'm editing. That brings us to this area over here, which is your tracks list. Now, let me resize the window. Right here, you see there's like a vertical line with a leftward facing arrow. If I click that, you'll notice that that white area here has disappeared. So if you open yours up and you see that there is no list here, just click on this and it opens it up. This is called your tracks list. This has a list of all the instrument tracks in your session, right? You'll only see instrument tracks in the MIDI editor because it only deals with MIDI instruments, MIDI tracks and MIDI instruments. Up here in the edit window, in the tracks list, you'll see all of your tracks, whether they're audio tracks, AUX tracks, master faders, VCA masters, everything is right in here. But for right here, this is your MIDI editor, so all of your MIDI instruments, MIDI tracks, anything to do with MIDI will be in this list. So you'll notice here that there's a little gray dot here. That lets you know if this is visible or active in the MIDI editor. And I'll show you, I'll zoom out and I'll show you that. This right here is the track color. This shows you what it is, that it's a MIDI instrument and the name and the position of the track. Now, one thing that's kind of cool too, which I didn't show you before, is that you can click and drag that up so that you can reorder these tracks. So in other words, if I wanted to make my drums down at the bottom and then the bass below that and then the piano below that, right, I could just reorder all those tracks and they move up here as well. So that's cool. So I recorded something on the piano. So if I click on that little dot over here, the piano becomes visible. Now, I can hover in this box here and use the scroll wheel to scroll up and down and left and right. And you can use the R key and T key. Now, also, you notice that the size of the instruments going this way looks just like this. You can change the size of those notes. And that is done, excuse me, let me, over in this box here. There we go. So you see that there's two lines. This is the A to Z box, and then right below that there's another box. If you click on the top portion of that box, see that the notes get fatter. And if you click on the bottom of that box, they get slender and more of them fit in the same area. So if you wanted to fill out the window, you can resize them that way as well. Now, if I hold down the Option key and I scroll up and down, it's also zooming in. Right? You see that? So that's another shortcut. And I'm just using with the scroll area on my mouse. See, without me holding down the Option key, it scrolls up and down, but then it zooms in and out. So that's another cool thing. Now, yes.
For your fit command, that Control Option F, you said, that doesn't work for me.
Do you have an area highlighted?
In the MIDI track?
So look, let me show you, Ken. So I'm highlighting this area here, right? Control Option F.
Yeah, that actually zooms my entire window, and I get some kind of warning that I can't be in narrow mode. I've never seen this before.
Yeah, that's above my pay grade. You'll have to talk to Avid about that one, Ken. I don't know what that is. Narrow mode?
No idea.
I'm going to have to look that up.
Well, I've got you, Pete. Is there a command that enables you to go from the main kind of window area to the MIDI editing split to move that gold bar from one to the other? Is there a key command for that?
I don't know, but it's just easy to click. You know, I don't really I don't really know if there is, Ken. Not that I know of. There might be. I just don't know what it is. I've never had cause to use that. All right. Now, before we edit the piano bit, the MIDI editor is very similar to the edit window in that it has its own bespoke. I just wanted to use that word in a sentence. Its own bespoke toolbar right here, except it's stripped down a little bit, right? In that you can record enable a track that you've got active here. You can solo a track that you've got in this window or group of tracks. You can mute it. Right here, it's got obviously notation display enable, and you can see a rough notation. I'm going to spend a minute on notation today as well. I have spent a little bit of time on it. You know, it has, I think like 6 or 7, right after Avid bought Sibelius, they put the basic Sibelius notation engine into Pro Tools. and they haven't updated it since then. So, you know, obviously Pro Tools is not used for notation. Typically, it's used for mixing and recording audio and mixing films and stuff. But it does do a very, very, very capable job with MIDI, which is why I use it, and also because I know it. And because most of the people I work with that mix the stuff that I write or go to films, they all work in Pro Tools. So I save a step of having to create different sessions that I send to people. It's all done right inside of Pro Tools. But I wish that they would update the notation editor, the notation window. But what they want you to do is they want you to spend money and buy Sibelius, because there is a command in Pro Tools. I don't have Sibelius in this computer, but it's in my laptop. You see right here, there's something that's grayed out that says send to. If I had Sibelius in this computer, you could click on that and it would send whatever you've got selected in notation into Sibelius. And there is a way using something called Rewire, I believe, where you can have Sibelius open in the background and be working in Pro Tools, and it will create notation in Sibelius. I've never done that, but I believe that is an option. But that's like, I don't like things to be complicated. This is complicated enough. I like everything to be inside of one session. I don't like to have background apps running. It's just more stuff to go wrong. All right, so click there. Then it's got zoom, so you can have like a little magnifying glass, right? But using key commands is quicker, you know. Then you've got your trim, your selector, your grabber, your scrubber, and your pencil. And look, if you click on your pencil, you've got all these different shapes. The only ones that work with MIDI are the top 5. Parabolic and S-curve do not work with MIDI information. Then you've got the name of the track. You've got 4 edit modes. Then you've got your grid on and off and the resolution of your grid. And here, if I'm going to work in grid, I'm going to get it down to like the lowest note value that I'm working with, which on this particular piece is a 16th note. All right, so remember before when we did our preferences, we selected that MIDI note color shows velocity. So what that means is if you look here, we've got several shades of purple. This is like a lighter shade of purple than that. The darker the shade, the higher the MIDI velocity value. So that's how you can quickly see this is a little bit soft, so I can maybe make that velocity a little bit higher. But let's quickly talk about multiple ways to edit the timing and duration of notes first before we talk about MIDI. So I've got my grid here, right? And you'll notice that if I want, just say, this is not musical, but I want to show you some of these techniques, right? So let's say that I've got, I want to get everything gridded up right here. And these are all a little early. If I go to my trim tool and just start hovering over the, let me move my face out of the way. Hovering over the grid and just start snapping, right? It'll just snap those beginnings right to grid. And the same with durations if you don't want things to linger over. So that's one thing you can do. I'm undoing with the Command Z, and you get multiple levels of undo. Another thing you can do using the grabber tool is just click and drag it, and it'll snap to grid if you want to keep the duration the same, right? And those are all perfect, which is not musical. And you can do that with multiple notes. Now notice that these 3 notes here all look to this one, and this one, they all look to be about the same amount early. So I can lasso, click and drag, and lasso those 3 notes and just click drag one of them and they'll all move. Right? So that's quick MIDI editing, another tip. Another thing you can do is you can use your selector and hover on the timeline like this and use Command E and then just then you'd have to go to slip mode and just select that and delete it. That's a little bit more cumbersome because then you have to go back and forth between grid modes. Now, going back and forth between grid modes, remember before I set up in my Apple preferences my function keys as standard function keys, these keys up here. So if I have F1, when I click on F1, this is going to turn to shuffle mode. F2 is slip mode. F3 is spot. F4 is grid. F5 goes to that magnifying glass over here. F6 goes to the trimmer. F7, F8, and F9 goes to the right. So you can just navigate very quickly by using that function row. If you don't want to do that, you can navigate here with Command 2 goes to the trimmer, 3 goes to the selector, Command 4 goes to the grabber, Command 6 goes to the pencil. Right, Command 7 makes it into a smart tool, which I don't teach because I never use it. And so that's another way that you can navigate. So one thing is that there's multiple ways to do the same, to get the same result, right? In other words, I wanted to switch between those edit modes. I could do it manually with the mouse, which is very cumbersome and gets you out of the creative flow. I can use these function keys, which is one way to do it, or I can do Command and then these numbers here. Okay, now we're just going to stick on manual editing for the time being. Now, we see that this one right here is a little bit lighter color than this one. That means the velocity is a little bit lower, and I might want something where when I'm playing, it's a little bit more even. So I want to increase the velocity on this note here. So if I have my grabber tool selected and I hold down the Command key and I hover over a note, and it doesn't have to be selected, you notice that the hand turns into like a horizontal trimmer, right? This is the vertical trimmer, and then it's horizontal, meaning it looks like a little cot, like a bed or something like that, or a tabletop, if you're looking at it from the side. And you can click and drag up on that. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, because when I click on this, I want you to look right up in this upper right-hand corner here and see what happens. So when I click on that, you see that that's the velocity of that note. It's 59. If I click on this one, it's 75. So if I want to make this one closer, I can drag up, and you see it tells me what the velocity is. I can get it right on there, or just, you don't have to be perfect. Just get it in that, somewhere in that ballpark, and you'll notice a more improved in terms of dynamic. Whoops. Right? Now, so that's a couple of ways. That's one way to edit the velocity. Now, another way to edit the velocity is to open up an edit lane. Oops, let's get this set up so you can see it a little better. I haven't shown step input.
You showed with the pencil tool how to draw in notes. But can you do it with the MIDI keyboard?
Yes. Okay. I'll do that in. Give me about a minute or two to do this. I thought that I definitely showed in. Oh, you took film scoring last semester. I definitely showed step input in Recording Studio Fundamentals, Chris. But I can show it here. That's no problem. I should show it here. Okay, so right over here, right, there's a little triangle that faces to the right. Click on that and it opens up the edit lanes. Now, there's 2 edit lanes here. And if you notice to the left here, it's remove or add another one below that. You guys should only need to see 1 lane. All right. It's just you don't need to see 50 edit lanes. It's ridiculous. I never have more than 1 open, maybe occasionally 2. Now you can choose what you want to see in this lane with this box here, right? You can add controllers. It's just a lot of stuff here. Let's just right now stick with velocity. Now, there's multiple ways to change the size of this. You can hover at the bottom of this box here, click and drag down, right? And then right in this area here, you see that it's got these lines. That's telling you what size. So you can make it large. And then you can see it, more of it in your screen. You can also hover with this edit lane right here, the whole edit window, and make it bigger. And then you can drag this up like that, and then you can make it even bigger. So all these things are completely resizable. And then a couple things. Yeah, I didn't show you these. Let's get this up here like this. So in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a minus and a plus sign, right? That's another way to zoom in and out. Right, you can see the notes are getting bigger and smaller. And then you can also resize the notes. Oh, I see. You can resize the lane with this plus and minus. And then there's another scroll thing right here, which is if this was back at normal size, you could use that. There's no scroll bar there. There is a scroll thing here. Okay, I'll get back to that. Okay, so these things which I've just recently learned. These lines here are called edit stalks, like, a celery stalk or an asparagus stalk, or Jack and the Beanstalk or something like that. So there's one for every, I wouldn't say for every, there's one for every note. Sometimes it looks like one. So for example, right here, oops, there we go. Right here, there are 3 notes. That's a chord, and you see that there are 3 stalks. So if I were to snap that all to grid, you could see that there's still 3 stalks, but they're just all on top of each other. And what you do is if you click on one, well, if I clicked on this one, you could see that this one gets lit, right? And the one that you're playing with becomes white. Now, again, let me zoom in a little bit. If I click on one of these and you look right in this corner here, you'll see the velocity value. And you see it tells you the velocity that you are changing it into. So you can, if you just want to, like this note here is very loud, I can bring that down just to make it a little bit smoother. Other things that you can do, whoops. Is you can use the pencil tool. So first, make sure that no notes are selected if you're going to use the pencil tool. And then let's say I wanted to make a crescendo up to this note here. I could just click and drag down and diagonally to the left. Right, and you could really exaggerate that if I wanted to. Right. And you see I can make something that's a little bit more, just a little bit more dynamic. almost sounds polyphonic. You've got those do 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 and then booty right? Like this, you got these first 4 notes, and then these top 3 notes are almost like a second instrument. Right, so you can sort of make it sound more polyphonic if you play around with that than just like a broken chords or a broken arpeggio. So that's a way to deal with some of those velocities and some of those notes. Now let's let me delete all this, and I have a few things that's punching in as well. Oh, okay. Right. Okay. I did show punching in, Ashley, before when I did like when I started recording at measure 5. But there's a different way of doing that, which I'll show you. Actually, I mostly do punching in when we record live audio, but I can show that with MIDI as well. Yes. Yes. Ask questions. I'm here to help. It's my, I just want you guys to learn as much as you can from me. Okay, so let's do, let me delete this. All right, so I want to, like, when you're doing a notation program, you can play something in real time. What most people do is they play things in, like, with one hand, and they use the other hand on the computer keyboard to change the note duration. And sort of that's the way I enter notes into Sibelius, although I'm not a notation expert. But what you can do in Pro Tools is something called step input. And there's no key command to open that up, but you go to input and event operations, and there it is, step input. So the first thing is, you'll notice that it's in the event operations window, and then these are all the other things. And we've gone over some of these. I haven't taught you all of these, but I've taught you the ones I think are the most important. But step input, you need to enable it. You have a destination track, right? So I'm choosing underwater piano. Step increment, so I'm going to do 1/8 notes. And I'm going to make my note length be 50% of what I play. And then for input velocity, you could have every note be the same velocity no matter how you play. Or you can use the input velocity. So meaning how I play it will affect the volume. So, all right, so I've got that set to 1/8 notes, right? And then watch this track here as I play. Now notice, didn't play back the rhythm I played. It played back step increment, 1/8 notes. Right? So that's the way that you could play something in if you're not a skilled keyboard player. It's another way of helping you play something in. I don't know why it didn't get the first chord. It's interesting. It's playing it, but it's not visible. Bizarre. Okay, so let's work with that a little bit more.
Pete, if you hit next step, it skips 1/8 note. Is that true?
Correct. I was just about to get to all that, Paul.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Now, I've enabled. All right, so let's talk about what Paul was saying. So I'm starting on measure 2 this time, right? So if I go 1, 2, next step, it'll skip an 1/8 note, and you can see that it played. And then if I do 1, 2, and then if I don't like that, I can do undo step and replay it back in. Now, what you can do that's also really cool here is you can assign a note. Right? So I've taken, my next step will be the note B6, and an undo step will be the note C7. So the 2 highest notes on my MIDI keyboard. which I'm not going to use in this, right? So let me do that again. So let's do. Oh, I don't like that last chord. Whoops. Got to be careful. Whoa, no, what did I do? Give me 1 second. Okay, I don't like that note there. So let me undo step, right? And let's go back to that. So, and then I'm going to skip. Oh, that I just did undo. Yes, okay, that's fine. Skip step. So you can work pretty quick rather than playing a chord, getting onto your mouse, playing a chord, getting onto your mouse, playing, you know, if you want to move steps around. So you can assign that, right? And then you can just delete that by double clicking on it and hitting delete. Now, enabling numeric keypad shortcuts, right? What does that do? That helps you out. Let me show you how that helps you out. Okay, I want to start off with 16th notes. I could take my mouse and click here, right? But if I'm, let's say, I'm right there, I want to get 16th notes. If I push the number 6 on my numeric keypad, you see it's just like this, you guys that do notation, and then the 3 enables a tuplet, right? So 1 is a whole note, 2 is a half note, 4 is a quarter note, 5 an eighth note, 6, 16th note, 7, and 8. And then there's your dot is your period or your decimal point here. So if I wanted to do something crazy, right? Six, 3. All right. So you see, quickly played something insane in. Okay, 20th century music. You passed your final. All right. So that is step input in a nutshell. All right. Now, there's something Pro Tools has that I just learned about. MIDI keyboard. All right, so I just saw that this existed, and it tells you. So, all right, so let's try something here. 2, 3, 4. Right? So I just played that in from the computer keyboard. Now let me undo that and let me try that with clicking on those notes, right? 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so.
Where was that in the menu bar?
It's in window, right? So I guess it's Shift K. So this is a recent addition, maybe a year or two. I'm not sure when, but I just saw somebody talking about it on one of the forums. And so there you have it. So that's if you're like on an airplane and you're trying to write something, you can type notes in on your computer keyboard. All right. Let me play something else in. One, two, and three, and four, and... All right. Now, I'm a little ahead of the beat here, right? With all this. So it's all selected, right? I can just take my grabber tool and move the first note, whoops, so that it's on the grid. And notice how everything else lines up pretty well. So in other words, my timing was good. I was just like, everything I played was just a little bit ahead of the beat, right? Now, there are other things that you can do here. You can use Option 0 and call up your quantize. We've gone over this before. And so I was playing, I think, eighth notes. I don't think I was playing anything more rhythmic than eighth notes. So we could set our quantize grid to an eighth note. And what I typically recommend is set your strength somewhere around 90%, unless you're doing, techno music and you want everything perfect. This way you retain some of the, it just moves it 90% closer to the grid, but not 100% closer. And then all that is a little bit better. Now, that note there, if let's say I wanted to make that longer, well, if I could use the trimmer tool and make that longer just by clicking and dragging it. Right? Or what I can do is I can select some notes. And if I wanted to do this one and this one. So the way I select notes is I hold the shift key down and I start clicking on the notes that I want to select. And then I can change duration, which I believe is Option P, like Paul. Or you can, if you're in quantize, you can just click on here and go to change duration. And then this has some cool functions to it, right? So you can set all. So I want to make those an eighth note. Whoops. And if I just click 480, which is an eighth note in there, right? And then hit apply, you'll notice that just the selected notes change. Right? Or let's say I selected these notes here and I go Option P and I want to make them all 2 bars long. So that's 8 beats. Click and they're all the exact same length. Now, let me delete that. Let me leave this up and let me play something else. All right, so I've got this little phrase here. So boop, beep, da, boo, yap, right? This note here, and this note, these notes here, right? I want to go do dee da do yap da do yap da do yap. I want to legato those notes. Now, obviously, I can use the trim tool and just slide them over. But what I can do is I can set legato so that the gap between notes is nothing. And apply. And then now those notes will last until the beginning of the following notes. right? So that's pretty cool. Let me play something else. Up, one more time. 2, 3, 4. All right, so these chords all sound like they are whole notes, taking up the full length of the measure, right? But I didn't play whole notes. I played much shorter note values except for the last chord, and I used the sustain pedal to hold the notes down. So it sounds exactly as I wanted it to sound, but if I wanted to see it in notation, that doesn't look good, right? So there's a trick. I can select this area here. Transform sustain pedal to duration, and then delete sustain events after transform. You don't need to do that. I'm going to do that here. You know, there's a thing when you play a real piano and you hold the sustain pedal down. That means that all of the strings in the piano are resonating sympathetically with the note that's being struck. Well, that doesn't happen with a sample, right? You're here, unless they've done some tricky programming and scripting. Typically, when you push a note down, it's just you're pushing different notes down. You're only hearing the sustain of those notes. You're not hearing anything sympathetically vibrating unless you've got something that's programmed incredibly well. So I'm not going to worry about that right now, but I'm going to delete sustain events after transform, and I'm going to hit apply, and then boom, I've got my perfectly notated bit. And does it sound different? No, there's a ton of reverb on that sound. It doesn't sound any different. All right. So for my next Houdini trick, what I'm going to do is, I haven't shown you that one. There's much more work that you can do here, but I'm just, showing you the meat and potatoes of stuff that you'll most likely use and need. All right, now I'm going to change this, excuse me, and I'm just going to use, I just did on Friday, I did a live stream. I have a series that I've been doing most Fridays called Inside Track, and I did a live stream where I showed how to take inexpensive or free orchestral sample libraries and make them sound better. And so instead of just using what we typically use in Pro Tools, I'm going to use a $30 sample library right now and show you a couple things with that. Because that's the kind of thing a student can afford, or somebody who's just doing this as a hobby. So I'm going to go to Spitfire Audio Originals, and I'm going to pick the Intimate Strings. So this is their own plugin, and literally this is $29. This is a repackaging of something that was called Albion 2 Loegra, which was released, I don't know, probably like at least 7 years ago, because I used it on a film called 41 on 41. And they're not sections. They're ensemble string patches, just like in Expand 2. So in other words, they don't have violin 1, violin 2, violas, cellos, and basses. They just have strings. And you play the whole keyboard. And it has different articulations. And it was professionally recorded in Air Lyndhurst, which is this big converted deconsecrated church that a lot of scores are recorded in, that George Martin designed. His family doesn't have anything to do with it anymore, but it's an amazing studio with top London session players. So if you click here, it's got all these different articulations, and these are basically what you need to do really beautiful, intimate music. It's not big bombastic stuff. So I've got this patch called Flautando. It comes up to, oh well, let's click on that. Flautando is like flute sounds, and that's when you're playing the violin and you're playing it up by the, you have the bow is over the fingerboard. That's also called sultasto. So I've got this string sound up, and let's play this a little bit. Now, these are, you know, you can use these on these strings on this $30 plugin on professional. I would have no problem using these strings on broadcast. I have used these strings in their original form on broadcast. I did it on a CNN documentary in 2014 called 41 on 41. I used this exact patch all over the score, and I thought it sounded great. Now, you have to massage this stuff. Now, when you're doing passages like this, right, you notice how there are common tones between the chords. These, for example, right here. One of the problems I'm having with this performance is that it's like this, almost like this sucking sound where, like, you're playing this note, right? Okay, so every downbeat of every measure is struck, and it just sounds synthetic. The attack, and one of my little tricks that you do to fix that, and this is not how you would write it for real players, but you're not writing for real players right now. Yeah, Ken, so I think I'm going to be getting to audio next week. Audio review, because we're already at 3:30 almost. Oh, it's Command I, Ken. You have to have something selected. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this. So I'm going to select, just lasso these three notes, and I'm going to, whoops, not four, these three. And I'm going to either consolidate, which we know is Option, Shift, and the number 3. Number 3, right? And then that becomes one note. Or if I undo that, you can go up here. Let's see. Doesn't have heel separation. All right, that would be, so Option, Shift, 3. And then here's another one. Anywhere else? Nope. All right, so let's take a listen to that. You see how much better that one sounded? And the last one? Because only some of the notes were re-articulating, right? It's much smoother. And because if you have live players, you're gonna make them stagger their bowing so that they're not all bowing at the same time on something like this, because you're gonna want a nice, loose, or smooth, buttery sound. So if people are changing their bowings at different times, they're not all articulating at the same pace, and that's going to create a really nice overlap. So you could sort of simulate that effect by taking the common tones and consolidating those so that it's one particular long note instead of individual notes. Yeah. Then obviously the next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do some work with dynamics. So let me open up the now, another thing you can do is you can change the release time, right? And make the release longer, and that'll make there be sort of like like a masking of when one note starts and one note ends. See that better already? And when you combine the two, right, that already sounds like so much better. And I just turned the release up like 10 points, right, from the original. So playing around with the release points, release time sort of gives you a fake legato feel to it, right, where they're sort of linking the notes together. Now, let me show you this. I did this in my Now, the way that they have set up this library is that you've got this slider here is set to MIDI CC11, which is expression. So that's just like volume, right? It's expression. If you've ever played keyboards live, you use expression or pipe organ or Hammond organ. Your right foot is typically on an expression pedal, which is a volume pedal that you use to help with your dynamics. I've been playing with a volume pedal since I was a teenager. And I actually have one in my MIDI setup that I use if I want to play two hands and do some dynamics. But they also have this slider here programmed, which is set to mod wheel, which the mod wheel is the wheel on your MIDI keyboard that's got that goes back to the center when you flick it. It's usually the one on the farthest left. Hold on one second. Don't move, mic stand.
The one on the left is the pitch bend wheel, isn't it?
Oh yes, thank you. I just told you something that was totally a lie. See what I mean about half-heimers? The pitch bend wheel is the one that snaps back to the middle. Thank you. The mod wheel is the one that you have to go all the way back to the beginning position at the bottom, and that's on the right. Thank you for correcting my half-heimers disease. Yes, I has been playing synthesizer since 1978. So on a keyboard like this, it has these little ribbons here, which do the same thing. So, you know, you might not have a pitch bend on your little keyboard. But that doesn't matter because you can draw it in afterwards. But what I want to show you here is what happens. So if I play this chord and I use the expression, it gets softer, but you're still seeing the same ratio of these frequencies here, all these overtones, right? They're all still present. But if I do play around with the mod and bring that up, you see how that it's not only getting louder, but it's adding increasing energy over here. And as I bring it down, you see the fundamentals are staying strong. And this stuff over here is getting weaker. So it's changing the timbre of the instruments. So that's something that you should know. Some sample libraries do that. Expand does not do that. But you can simulate that by using a low-pass filter. You can simulate that very actually effectively, which I can show, but that's not today. But so the last thing to do to make this sound really good is to add some dynamics. And if you can't play them in, what you can do is draw them in. So we got our mod wheel, right? So we can do something like this. And then maybe a little decrescendo, and then a crescendo, and then a decrescendo, and then I'm just using the freehand. And then fade down to nothing. So that would give us this. Now, if I were to exaggerate that, can hear how the timbre is changing as it's playing. Now, the way that I do that is I use my little device here, right? So this is a Nano Control 2. I've got one that I like better, but I leave this one set up for teaching because this is cheap. It's inexpensive, and the one problem with it is it's got very short throw here. The faders are not very long, but I don't have a problem with it. So that brings us to something called Midi Merge. That's this guy here. And when you click on this, you can overdub MIDI data without erasing the notes that are there. So in other words, if I start here, a little before where the music starts, and I play the music and work this fader like I'm doing a mixing board, you'll see in the mod wheel lane that it will draw in the data, but it will not erase the notes. Oh, wrong slider. Come on, Pete, wake up. Right, so you can play that data in and then just go and clean it up afterwards. And you could play multiple data. So in other words, if I were to do this, I'm doing expression and right. So this is one time where I will show two lanes. You can see I've done both, right? And so I'm doing volume and dynamics. All right, let me show one more thing today for Ashley. So if you show the transport controls, let me play something in. Let me go back to piano. Okay, that was going so beautifully. That's the greatest piece of music I ever heard in my life until I got to about here, right? That was a joke. Anyway, so if I'm in slip mode and I put my playback head right before where I made this mistake, up here in our transport, you have something called pre-roll. If I click on this and I hit, let's say 2, that means it will play it will start playing 2 measures before this, where the playback head is, and it will punch you in automatically and start recording from there. Now you have to turn off Midi Merge, otherwise it will just add notes on top of it. All right, so I'm going to turn that off, and then I'm going to hit 3, and you'll hear it start playing back. Whoops, let's do it one more time. Let me get a little bit earlier. And I'm out. So it did play back that first note, although it erased it. I don't know why it did that. I've never heard that happen before. And then it started recording right there. Right here. So I basically played that note twice. So I could actually just transpose all that up. 2 semitones. Right? Or what I could do also is delete that bit there. And that's pre-roll and punch-in recording. Now, what happens if I only want to, if I want to redo this much, right? Leave what's happening afterwards and redo this bit. Well, then I need a little post-roll of, not post-Malone, but post-roll. Let's say 1 measure, and let's do that again. All right, so you see it stopped recording after the highlighted area and then just kept playing normally. So that's pre-roll and post-roll. Okay. All right, so that's 2-hour review of MIDI. I taught you more stuff about transposing and quantizing, right? Well, let me just do one more quick thing with transposing. So the selected area, if I want to transpose this up, I could use the grabber and just drag. I could do Option T and bring up the transpose window, or I could simply use the up arrow to go up half steps, or the down arrow to go down half steps, or the shift and the up arrow to go up an octave, shift to go down an octave. And that's a quick way to do that. Now, another quick thing to do is if I'm on this note here and I push this right arrow, you see how it goes to different notes? So it's basically going to the next note time-wise. And if let's say I quantized all this, like right exactly to the, all right, and I picked this note here, I hit the next one, it's going to go up to each note. Or you can go backwards. If I just wanted to transpose that one note down and this one up, you could do that. And then this one down an octave. And then this one up an octave. Right, so you could quickly navigate around the keyboard using a combination of shift, up, the up and down arrows, shift, up and down for transposing, and then the left and right arrows for going from note to note, or planet to planet, if you're traveling the spaceways. So, okay. Yeah, Ken, I don't know about I don't know about that. Do you have count off? Ken, do you have this selected up here? Count off? Because that's, if you have count off selected, right, all you'll hear is click before it starts recording. Right, and it'll start playing. Right. So that's when that happens. If you have both of those set up, that might be happening. In other words, if you have count off and pre-roll, that might be doing it. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's lesson, and we'll do audio review next week. I've been live streaming this on YouTube, so it's already up on YouTube. And for everyone on YouTube, thanks for watching. I'm going to sign off of YouTube right now. Please like, subscribe, ring that bell, etc., etc. Here we go.